Everyone, I'm recording this video because it's really important to me that people who devote their lives to research live a good life outside of the lab. There are a lot of tough professions out there, but I think ours is kind of unique in the sense that you're really not earning much money at all for a long time. Most of your 20s, in fact, especially if you do a postdoc. And I think it's important that as we watch other members of our cohort, maybe from undergraduate, going to get their MBA or JD or medical degree, that we can easily get jealous of the fact that they're earning so much more money once they're done with their graduate program. Now, granted, they're going to be in debt, but with their salaries, they're usually going to erase that debt relatively quickly. And so I know I had this clickbait title, and it's not entirely tongue-in-cheek, how to get rich with a PhD, but I'll start out with the ground truth of how do you get rich with a PhD. Number one, earn a professional salary for your whole career. And number two, be old. And I'm only slightly joking about this. And one of the reasons that this idea occurred to me, because it's obvious to a lot of people, but it's not necessarily obvious to someone who sort of came through their professional life in kind of a go-getter culture in like California or other kind of high-cost techie areas, where if you're in a university in those places, you are sometimes looking for advancement or development activity from super high net worth individuals who are maybe on the youngish side, but who made all their money from some big entrepreneurial or investment play. But the vast majority of people who find themselves in the top 1% are older and got that money by a lifetime of careful, prudent decisions with their money. And so, the first step is to manage spending. The second step is to manage investments. And while you're in graduate school, there are a few different ways to do that, and we'll cover a couple of those topics in this short video. Just so you know, this is not knowledge that I had at all when I was a PhD student. Like some of these things I had heard of, compounding interest, it's great and whatever, but I'm going to save the world and people are just going to recognize my accomplishments and pay me a lot of money and stuff, which is not really what happens. So, in graduate school, this is kind of a micro scale tactic for what I did is, in order to finance my then fiance, now wife's engagement ring, I would go to the ATM once a week and withdraw $140 and spend $20 per day, averaged out over the week, in cash. And that's all I got to spend, exclusive of rent and utilities. All right, so core financial principles, I mentioned these before: save more than you spend and take advantage of the miracle of compound interest and other forms of appreciating assets like real estate and stock options and stocks and so forth. Also understand the difference between money and capital. Money is the medium by which you exchange for goods and services, but then capital are things that you own or have some kind of agency over, like intellectual capital, social capital, friends, a big LinkedIn network, and so on, that you can convert to other opportunities to provide security for you as you go on through your professional career. There is a concept that is basically responsible for any amount of financial stability that I came into relatively recently, and that's geographic arbitrage. So it is important, I think, to build a career in a place where there is a lot of opportunity for connection and a lot of training opportunities, but oftentimes big universities or high-profile universities tend to be in big cities and high cost of living areas. There are, of course, huge exceptions like, Purdue and University of Illinois and even, University of Rochester, for example, and many others. But there are so many universities that are just in places that are ungodly expensive, like anything in the Bay Area or Boston or New York or the Washington, D.C. area or Los Angeles or increasingly Austin, Texas and the Denver area and even more so Atlanta now are becoming more and more expensive. So if you can get into a position where you are in a position to earn some money in a real job after graduation, really consider moving to an area where you're not going to be paying so much for fixed costs like housing. And I have another thought about that in a minute. And people say, well, salaries are adjusted for cost of living. Maybe they are by tens of percents, but cost of living, like housing payments, can differ by factors of 3 and 4. So like 200 and 300%, not 10 or 20%. So there's a huge difference. Some other advantages to geographic arbitrage is that you have less traffic, shorter commutes, more green space, I think less cortisol and adrenaline, at least, I found that to be true for me. Also, a lot of lower cost areas tend to be more resistant to climate change. That's especially true if you're considering the industrial Midwest or the Great Lakes area, or the Third Coast, as some people call it, compared to California, which is always at risk of drought and fire. Okay, so once you are, well, let me go back. If you're in grad school and you're making, say, $35,000 to $42,000, depending on what your graduate student stipend is, hoping that graduate student stipends were somewhat I can knock on, last for the next 20, 30 years or whatever. Hopefully they're not too subject to the political winds of change. But if you're making that amount of money, you're not obviously going to be able to create some really high value investment portfolio, but you can do some things with a few $1,000s a year in savings that might get you to a point where you're experienced enough at looking at different asset classes and bond and index funds, and even probably not real estate investments at that point, but there are definitely some experiences that you can have by putting a little money in this Vanguard or index fund or so on, just to kind of get a feel for how markets move. And you can look at, other non-depreciating assets too, like, maybe you don't want to buy the brand new iPhone, but you could buy a 20-year-old violin or something, and that's going to retain its value, right? So not everything is, not every kind of place that you can put your money you could count as a toy. Some of it is actually reconvertible to capital, and some of it might actually appreciate. Okay, so you get some experience in graduate school. The other thing that you want to do in graduate school is develop skills so that you can get a higher paying job when you get out. And that seems obvious, but what that means is that if there is a mini MBA program as a grad student or postdoc, take it. And I did it as a postdoc, and my advisor was Shannon Bao at Stanford, and she's super supportive of education outside of the lab, but I was a little nervous about it, so I didn't tell her until after it was completed. And she has since, given my experience in it, has suggested to other of her trainees to do it, and that was one of the most valuable things that I did. Maybe I'll do another video on business training as a PhD student. So after you get your after you develop all these skills, take that Python class, all that extra stuff that you can add to your skill set, and you land a good job and you're making, $115,000 or something, you can start thinking about, assuming your housing costs are low enough and your fixed costs are low enough, your vehicle costs and your, hopefully your alcohol and coffee and cannabis costs, just kidding, are not like out of control, then you can think about putting those overages not in a traditional commercial bank savings account whose interest rates suck, but in other kinds of asset classes. Okay, so let's say that you are making a professional salary and you are living in a low-cost area and you were smart with your car purchase, like you got a 3-year-old car which has pretty much all the new tech, but it had a single owner lessee and you got it used. And anyway, so you're not spending a ton of money on like a car payment and your mortgage or a huge rental payment. Then you can talk about what kind of investment vehicles should you use. And the standard one is like whatever your 401k or 403b goes into. And that's some kind of low fee index fund on Vanguard or Fidelity or something. And these can be stock index funds, they can be bond index funds, they can be have some kind of environmental justice component or whatever, whatever you want to do, as long as it's had more or less a good growth profile. Now, is that going to be guaranteed forever? No. It has been a good investment in general, but nothing's ever guaranteed. So there are other kinds of asset classes you can think about, like rental properties, physical assets. There might be items you can buy and resell. There might be a book you could write, or other ways of turning your time into capital and time and expertise into capital, depending on what your day job allows you to do. Like if you're in academia, for example, textbooks are a way of generating like capital that involve maybe a time as an investment, if not necessarily money. And a lot of times this is called passive income, meaning it's income earned from investments or things that you own. And the way that I like to think about controlling spend is kind of the opposite of earning passive income. It's more kind of like the cynical view is, don't make your spend someone else's passive income. That is, minimize your mortgage payments and lease payments, because those are paying rents to somebody else and you're making them richer. So how do you minimize mortgage interest? Well, buy a cheaper house. How do you buy a cheaper house? The same way that you make more investable income, and that's by doing a geographic arbitrage, right? Moving to a lower cost location. Other ways to avoid being the source of other people's passive income is avoid spending money on depreciating assets like the newest car, the newest clothes, the newest electronic devices. Maybe if you're going to buy toys, don't buy electronics, but buy things that people might want to rebuy. And those are things that are probably used to begin with. What are examples? Art, other human artifacts that have real stored value. You can ask me about my trombone collection sometime, but I know some other people who have other types of collections. It's also a lot more fun and fulfilling to have those kinds of hobbies and use those toys that don't like lose 100% of their value in 5 years like a phone does. Okay, so I mentioned like grad school budgeting. Like yeah, avoid major expenses. But what some of the things that you can do that I've already mentioned, like even with a grad school budget, is you can just get experience, focus on skill building. I mentioned that stuff already. One of the huge advantages to being a PhD student is that you come into contact with a lot of really smart people. Those are your colleagues, those are your classmates, those are your mentors, they're people in other universities that are maybe your collaborators, and really invest in those relationships because they may lead to consulting opportunities, they may lead to employment at a high growth startup. And if you're one of the early employees at a kind of a tech or a deep tech or biotech startup, you can get stock options, which might actually translate into real money, like money that you can make as a younger person. And, if you're really ambitious and have like the perfect IP, you could commercialize something yourself and become, fairly well off at a younger age. The kind of person that your alma mater is very quickly going to be knocking on the door of. You can also have access, and this is something that we've done, is angel invest in other people's startups. And because you have domain knowledge and you know those people, and it's still a private company, it's not insider trading. You're just smart because you have a PhD and you might have some discipline, some knowledge of the discipline. And there are also reasons to invest in your own like formal education. So one of the best things that I ever did was to take a mini MBA course when I was a postdoc at Stanford, which I've mentioned already. But some of the most like well-off people that I know with PhDs have a JD or an MBA. So they went into patent law or they climbed the business ladder with a PhD. And I think at those intersections of core research, competency, and scientific literacy, along with training in law or business, that's a really powerful combination of skills. And you can very quickly at those intersections of, not that many people have PhDs, not that many people have JDs, and when you multiply, your 1 in 80 times 1 in 80 or 1 in a 6,400, and so there aren't that many people that can do that kind of work, and you will go into debt or more debt, but you would make it back pretty quickly. That is, if you can tolerate, being a student again. Although some employers will allow you to do continued training on nights and weekends, and sometimes even on the employer's dime, which is great. All right, that's all I'm going to say for now on this topic. I hope you found something useful. See you next time.